Last week I showed you how to make the base of my Rumi wig, which I will link up in the cards in the description below. And this week I'm going to show you how I made the braid, which wound up being far more labor intensive than I ever could have imagined. So if that sounds interesting, make sure to stick around to the end to see the final results. Subscribe for more content from me, and of course like this video if you liked it. If you have any questions about the process, I'm happy to answer them. Just pop them down to the comment section below. And with that, let's get started. So just to recap where we left off with my last video, as you can see here, the final thing that I did was stub all of the ponytails that I had created with the zip ties, and I put that hair aside to save to use for later in the braid. After cleaning up the base of the wig, it was time to move forward with the fun part, which is the braid. Rumi has a very interesting way that the braid starts in front of her head. I sectioned off the front part previously and clipped that aside. I actually cut a hole through the wig base underneath the hair and slid this zip tie through it. And I added a little hot glue to reinforce that part of the wig because I was very uncertain of the strength of the wig cap itself because it kind of went through the lace. So hopefully that hot glue settles and creates a nice sturdy barrier. And then for the start of the braid, I rolled up some quilt batting and hot glued the edges together, wrapped some hair around that and secured it with a zip tie in the middle. And this is going to be the start of the sides of my braid. Zip ties are going to be the best tool for this look. Once that's secure, I crimped out the hair and brushed it to add some fluff because we don't want any of this quilt batting showing. So I'm going to use as much of the hair here as possible to cover up the front of the quilt batting. Next, it's time to start sculpting. So I played around a little bit with how I wanted the front part of the braid to look and figured out exactly how I wanted to zip tie this together. Once I had it the way I wanted it, I zip tied it tightly to the base of the wig. I'm going to take these front pieces and start sculpting them around the quilt batting. To do this, I used Uhu glue, combing it through the hair and sticking it down onto the quilt batting. Uhu glue is a very gentle glue. The one I use is a plant-based, so it's safe to use indoors, it's safe to touch, and there are no fumes. So what I'm doing is starting with the inside of the quilt batting, and then I'm just working my way around the quilt batting, smoothing the hair out as I went with some glue. Once I had that one side the way I wanted it, I took another zip tie and tightly secured the hair pieces down to the quilt batting. So I took an extra zip tie and secured it down to the base of the wig. Once I sculpted out the other front piece, took some extra wefts I had made with the hair we had cut off previously and used that to cover up the visible zip tie. I grabbed another piece of quilt batting tubing and glued that down into the open space of the braid. This creates the third piece that I need so that I can actually braid all of this together. Now it's time to build out this braid and cover up the quilt batting. So using wefts that I had previously made, I just glued them down with hot glue, hiding the edge into the hole in the middle of the first part of this braid, and using Uhu glue to smooth it down over the quilt batting. I repeated this over and over and over again until I covered up all of the batting and got the desired look. I had that middle piece covered. I used some more Uhu glue to keep the hair nice and smooth over the batting, and then worked on the next section of the braid. Found that testing out the braid itself helped me find gaps in the quilt batting with how the hair twists when I braided it. I would often braid a section and then unbraid it, and then braid it again and then unbraid it, add hair, braid it, unbraid it, add hair, and so on and so forth until I had built it out enough to cover the quilt batting. I don't think I said this earlier, but the reason why I use the quilt batting is because I do not want this wig to be very heavy. I am prone to migraines, and I definitely don't want one while I am at home at. So quilt batting is a very lightweight material. It adds volume and fluff to whatever it is that you're sculpting, such as this braid, and it allows me to use less hair, which makes it lighter and also saves on the cost of wigs. All in all, this wig consists of 2 full wigs and 2 sections of braiding hair. So not too bad with the length that I got. After working my way through this next part, once I had a section the way I liked it, I used a zip tie to secure the hair onto the quilt batting in the direction that I wanted it to. I found that this helped out a lot because I couldn't sculpt out one of the sections and hold it the position that I needed it to while the glue dried so I could move on to the other pieces. So using these zip ties to just secure bit by bit really helped out. So as I worked on the next section, I was able to see places where either the batting was showing or a zip tie was showing or some of the glue edges of my wefts were showing, and I would just add more hair and blend that into the next section of the braid. Once I had the second section, it was time to move on to the third section of the braid, which is going to be the part that covers the stub. I will say my stub was slightly off center, so I had to keep checking the front of the wig to make sure that I got this part centered, but it worked out in the end. The stub itself added quite a bit of volume to this part of the braid, forcing it to enlarge, which looks, I think, really nice and gives me that nice gentle flare out as the braid gets thicker. I was able to work the quilt batting around the stub and then zip tie it in place. Added more glue to hold the hair into position. And because we were starting to get around the curvature of the wig, I really wanted to make sure that this was held down to the base, so I do go in and secure it to the wig cap, just like I did with the front two pieces. And I noticed at this point that there was going to be visible zip ties, so once again I added in more wefts and blended that into this portion of the braid. And I just kept doing this, working my way through the section until I was happy with it, and then put in the final zip ties, smoothed it out with some more glue, and then finally I was able to move on to the next sections. And this is just a rinse and repeat as I work through the part of the braid that is attached to the wig cap. Once I got to this point, I actually hot glued in some longer pieces of quilt batting to the desired length that I wanted the braid to be. And then this is the part where it got a little tricky. Once I had added the additional quilt batting, I have an extra problem I needed to solve for. Since I made her jacket, the sequin jacket, this braid is going to get caught all over the sequins and it's going to be a messy nightmare. So to prevent that from happening, I decided to put a tulle netting over the braid. This is a tried and true method that's used all the time in theater and cosplay to keep hairstyles neat and tidy. However, a lot of times we wind up putting one netted tube fully over the braid and sort of stitching that into place. But I really wanted the top of the wig to not have the netting showing, and I didn't want the edge of the netting to be showing either. I then created 3 tubes of netting. I slipped them onto the individual tubes before braiding. So before I added the netting, I did add in quite a bit more hair along the tube, trying to lengthen it out before I added in the tulle netting, and crimping and fluffing the hair as I went just to make sure that the quilt batting gets fully covered. And once I was happy with this, I added in the netting, which I made a horrible mistake here. Normally you sew the netting tube and then slip it on, but I thought because I wasn't sure exactly when I was going to stop the braid, I would need to keep adding wefts of hair as I worked my way down the tube. So I'm going to need to keep getting into the net to add these wefts. So I used some hot glue to sort of tack it in place, and then with the plan of later going in and hand stitching, but that wound up being super messy and took a ton of hand stitching to clean up, so I don't recommend that. I do recommend sewing these nettings into an actual tube and slipping them on once you have added all of the hair down the quilt batting. It will save you a lot of frustration and a lot of effort later. But once I had the tubes where I wanted them, I was able to actually move forward with braiding the rest of the wig. I did braid it probably 2 or 3 different times before I got the look that I wanted. Again, adding hair as I went, happy with the length. Honestly, I probably would have made it longer, but I got really frustrated in the end and called it short, so it goes down just below my waist. Once I got to the bottom of the braid and I liked how everything was looking, I zip tied the ends together and then I cut off the extra quilt batting. I then sculpted these additional pieces into a more rounded shape, before adding wefts around this to hide the batting, and once again zip tying the edges of these wefts into place just to make sure that they were secure. I crimped and teased these to cover up the batting, and then I cut them down into the shape that I wanted, and using a ton of hairspray glued everything down into place. Once that was finished, it was time to move on to the front part of the hair. So to do the bangs, I crimped out half of them and did a little bit of a tease to give them some more volume and fluff, working the hair back until I liked the amount of volume that I got. And then I added in the very front pieces using hairspray to smooth them into place. And then I zip tied them a little past where I wanted them to be, cut off the excess hair, and hot glued the ends together, just like how I stubbed the wig in the first video. And then the trick that I did here to make sure that zip tie isn't seen, I put hot glue into the front part of the wig, and then I actually flipped the zip tie over so that it created more of a bump in the front and tucked that hair tie neatly into the first section of the braid that I had worked on. And that's the front of her wig. I do plan to trim up the sideburns, but I'm going to wait until I'm actually wearing it before I do that. We're going to get trimmed in a couple of weeks. Next, it's time to finish out the bottom tail. I'm going to take some more quilt batting to build this section up a little bit more into a tube shape. I'm going to take some bias tape, wrap that around the bottom of the wig. In the golden performance, Rumi does have some sort of gold cap down here. I just never could get a clear enough shot to figure out what it is, so this is my take on it. So that is my Rumi wig. I hope you enjoyed the process of making this video. Again, if you have any questions, drop them down in the comment section below. I'm happy to answer them. Again, if you like this video, make sure to hit the like button. Make sure to subscribe for more content from me. And with that, I will see you in my next video. Bye.